Hello, thanks for tuning in. Stuart, the Unrepentant Atheist. So we have the Sunday show, 5th of May, 2024. Eric and Matt in the chair. John called in to put forward a number of points, but one thing he wanted to prove is the existence of the soul. Now, at this point in the conversation, he's already presented Plato and Socrates, who believed in the soul, as evidence for the soul. Now, Matt and Eric have both been through that whole argument from authority, and they spent time on that. That's not what I'm going to focus on. I'm focusing on his argument concerning the near-death experiences as evidence for the soul. Eric is actually addressing this, so let's have a listen to some of the conversation.
Should your brain be getting any blood?
Exactly. But here's the thing, okay? You can actually cut off oxygen to the brain, and the brain holds on and keeps operating to various degrees of efficacy over the next few minutes. It takes several minutes for your brain to actually die. That's why we can have people who clinically die on the operating table and can be quote unquote revived. They get their heart beating again after a certain amount of minutes without brain damage, right? So we aren't actually bringing the brain back to life. We're restoring the support functions to keep that brain going before too much damage becomes permanent. So just because your heart stops beating doesn't mean your brain instantly stops functioning. Your brain is still functioning. And I think, I'm not a doctor, but that's the state, that oxygen deprived, blood deprived state. That's when the brain starts doing really weird things. And one of the common things we see is out of body experiences. Or we hear, rather. We don't see it, but we hear about it.
Yeah, I'd like to address that, because when John first mentioned this about out-of-body experiences, he said, what about these souls? What about people being clinically dead and then reporting that their souls are floating above their bodies? They can see what's going on in the operating theater, etc., etc. That is so anecdotal that it's barely even worth addressing. I've studied near-death experiences. I've looked in detail at the Aware Studies 1 and 2, Sampania, and I've looked at other so-called evidences. A lot of it are fairly sensationalist books written by people who already believe in the phenomenon. In other words, that there is actually something real going on here, not just near death. They believe something supernatural is going on. There are claims that when you actually look into each individual story, you start finding out, for example, that the people this purportedly happened to can't be traced for questioning. We don't know the name of the nurse. She seems to have disappeared. And when you actually start doing the nitty-gritty of investigating each and every case, you actually end up drawing a blank. I'm not saying that is the case in every single one, because I haven't looked at every single case. It's just that when people have come onto my channel and said, what about NDEs? I've said, well, give me a case, I'll investigate it. When I've gone out and investigated, I faced all these problems with confirming the details of the story. And people are believing in the existence of the soul based on this really poor evidence. The Aware Studies did not turn up anything remotely interesting. It really didn't. It was not one big disappointment, two big disappointments, because it was two huge studies. So my only problem with the way that Eric and maybe Matt dealt with this is that they didn't rebut him straight away when he said, well, what about these cases? And say, well, what cases? And then state their objections. Like, I've done the research. I know that these cases just simply aren't there. And where they do exist, they're fairly easily explainable. Okay, let's keep listening.
Okay, so you feel that it's completely natural then?
Yes. I lean towards that direction because, well, first of all, I look at it as a question of...
Yeah, well, I mean, for that, I would say I've got no reason to believe that it's anything other than natural, because supernatural causation has never, ever been demonstrated a single time in the history of mankind. So I would also tend towards that, but not assert it as an absolute cause. I would be open about it. If somebody can prove there's a supernatural causation, of course, I would accept it.
Likelihood, okay? What's more likely? Just a natural explanation or a natural and a supernatural explanation? And in that case, we haven't really demonstrated the supernatural.
Well, if you already believe in God, if you already believe in the soul, if you believe that supernatural phenomena are real, then you're probably going to have a different answer to that question than Eric.
Actually exists yet. So in questions like that, in statements like, or in these hypotheticals, these anecdotes, I'm going to lean towards relying on the things we know that exist rather than things we don't know exists. So yes, I will lean towards the natural all the time. Once the supernatural can be demonstrated to exist, then I might lean towards those explanations, but not until that happens.
Yeah, I mean, there was one case which I'm not sure if it was in one of the AWARE studies. It might have been something else, but the claim was that this woman was revived. She woke up and she correctly remembered the instructions given by the surgeon on how to use the shock device or something, and she apparently remembered the exact words. Well, if she's in the room and we have these cases where people are awake during operations, they can't move. The surgical staff think they're under the anesthetic, but in fact they're awake and conscious. They just can't move at all, and they hear everything. It's quite possible in these cases people, they go through these experiences and maybe maybe something is still switched on to the extent that they can hear what's being said, and then they remember it when they wake up. There always seems to be a possible naturalistic explanation for these very rare claims where they've been confirmed that these claims actually were made and they got anything at all correct.
What about the people that are clinically dead and they experience either heaven or hell?
Yeah, well, okay, that's how can you prove that they experienced heaven and hell? They were clinically dead. He means that their heart stopped, but obviously they weren't brain dead. And they woke up and they said, oh, I was in heaven. Like Dr. Ibn Alexander, 3 months after he came out of a coma, 3 months after that, he suddenly remembered that he'd been to heaven. He'd seen his sister, and he made all these claims. He'd been there and he'd come back 3 months after he'd actually woken up. He suddenly thought, oh my God, and it happened to coincide with the fact that he was being struck off and deprived of his income. And he went on to make a lot of money out of his book, solving a problem for himself. But yeah, I mean, coming out of a situation like this and saying, oh my God, I was in heaven, I saw Jesus, is not the same as actually being in heaven and having seen Jesus. It might have just been a dream or a hallucination or something while you're still coming out of this state.
Again, the brain malfunctioning. The brain's not dead when a person's clinically dead. The brain is shutting down. All right. And here's the thing too, like, okay, with the heaven and hell thing, that
I must admit, I've heard of people claiming they've been to heaven. Never heard of anybody claiming that they've been to hell.
kind of gets more into like cultural conditioning. If you live in the United States, you live in Australia, you live in Europe, you're going to have predominantly Christian conditioning in culture and in your society. It's going to put those ideas in your head. So when you go to sleep and you have dreams and you're dreaming about things you've experienced, things you've known, when your brain is dying, your brain's going to be generating imagery based off of what you put into your brain. How is that unreasonable?
Well, it's not, but I'm not sure that that's the explanation of it, though.
Yeah, and neither am I. I don't know that Eric's explanation is correct either. What is the correct explanation? That's a problem. We don't know. And if we don't know, we're not justified in concluding that it could be only one particular explanation. And really, with regard to supernatural explanation, I would question whether that could even be a candidate explanation, given that, as we know, there have been no confirmed cases of the supernatural.
Is it a sufficient explanation, though, John?
Well, I guess you might think so. I guess I'm
don't. Asking you. So what is insufficient about that explanation? Okay, so what is insufficient about the naturalistic explanation that the supernatural explanation somehow satisfies?
Yeah, well, the supernatural explanation means that there's a soul, and it means that there's life after death. That's how it satisfies in a way that the naturalistic explanation doesn't.
when a person dies and they not only can see their body from the ceiling, but then they either go into heaven or hell, and then they experience the heat and the fire of hell, or the...
Yeah, I mean, again, he's making claims here. He's talking as if this actually really happened, that people really did go to hell, they felt the heat, or they saw the light in heaven, and that these things really happened.
bliss of heaven.
I mean, you can have a dream where you can imagine you can feel in your dream heat. I've had dreams where there's been a fire, and in the dream I felt, wow, this is hot. Or I've seen a blinding light in my dreams. Doesn't mean that I've been to hell or heaven.
Okay. So last night I had a dream. Last night I had a dream that I was in an outdoor market and I was shopping around. Did I actually go to an outdoor market and shopping around, or was my brain just generating imagery over past experiences?
That would be a very mundane dream, by the way. I hope he has better dreams than that.
It was generating imagery.
Okay. So when a person's
yeah, so it's generating imagery when it's mundane and, it doesn't threaten his worldview. But when it is claiming to actually, when it's being claimed, when the claim is such that it's supporting his existing worldview about God, heaven, hell, the soul, etc., then he'll accept it. It wasn't generating imagery then. It was actually a real supernatural thing.
on the table and their brain's in a traumatized state, where do you think the heaven and hell imagery is coming from? Is it coming from an actual heaven or hell, or is it coming from previous inputs into their brain from either their culture or their religion or stories they've read? What do you think? What's more likely in that case? Hell and heaven actually exist, or your brain is just generating imagery over what was fed previously?
Well,
Come on, Eric. You can't expect this man to... Well, you can't expect him to accept your point and your very good reasoning there about a possible explanation, when if he accepts that, it will rule out entirely all the NDE evidence which is supporting his belief in the existence of a soul. That kind of realization or acceptance is not going to come easily, if at all.
I guess I feel that there is a heaven and hell, but I guess I can see where you would disagree with that.
Okay, well, I'm asking you what you think, though, because I think the naturalistic explanation is perfectly sufficient. That might be strongly. It's sufficient for.
The problem is a lot of Christians and other theists have been told, or they've read, there are thousands of these cases where people see a tunnel, they see a light, they've been to heaven, they've seen relatives, or they've been floating above the body. They've heard conversations and they've been able to repeat them and all these things. And there's so much of it that some of these cases must be true, maybe not all of them. And on that basis, they're going to go ahead and believe in it.
Explaining the phenomenon we see. I don't see a need to put in the supernatural. Now, if you can demonstrate to me that the supernatural exists outside of anecdotes and outside of appeals to, past philosophers, if you can give me something meaty that I can bite my teeth into and actually really analyze, that'd be great. But as so far in this conversation, that hasn't happened. And we've been going now for about a half an hour. So I think people might getting bored at this point. Do you have anything? I guess my last question would be, do you have anything like concrete you can hand me that goes, here's an example of the supernatural. Here's how you can invoke the supernatural. Here's how we can analyze or test the supernatural. Do you have anything in that ballpark?
Well, we'll just have to wait till we're on the operating table.
Well, we would be back to square one then.
Yeah, well, now he's saying that we'll only know for certain if we actually have the experience ourselves. Well, no, not really, because you can have an experience, you might think you've experienced in heaven and hell, but that's not the same as actually experiencing heaven and hell. Again, it could be a hallucination, it could be a dream. So no, I mean, being on an operating table and being an NDE yourself and being resuscitated and having an experience shouldn't really prove anything to you, because that could have a naturalistic explanation. So he kind of has missed the point there.
then because we just talked about all the natural explanations about that and things that I think is sufficient to explain those phenomenon.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm second guessing, Eric. I'm going to get some criticism for that. I think it's nearly the end of the call.
So I could be on the operating room table. I could be on the operating room table tomorrow. I could be in a car accident, bleeding out. My heart could stop, and I could have an out of body experience. And then the doctor saved me, and I come back, and later on I say, "Wow, I had an out of body experience. My brain was doing some funny stuff in that traumatized state." I would not be any closer to the supernatural at that point, because I have explanations that can sufficiently explain those phenomenon.
Okay, well, we'll just have to wait and see.
I guess so.
How are we going to wait and see? Eric's just said that even that experience wouldn't be sufficient evidence.
Okay.
All right, John.
It's good talking.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
Well, of course, if he means we'll have to just wait and see. If he's saying that we'll have to wait till we actually really do die, not clinical death, but the brain is mush, is never coming back. Absolute death beyond clinical death. And either there will be just nothingness, no consciousness, nothing, or we'll wake up somewhere in the spirit world. Dang, there is a soul after all. I think that's what he means. Okay, well, thanks a lot. By the way, the reason Matt never really took much part in that call is because he was playing chess throughout. I hope he won his game. Eric dealt with it well. Thank you very much. Goodbye.